Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Ellie Savitt, the DA from Washtenaw County, Michigan, which is the home of Ann Arbor. How you doing, Ellie?
I'm doing well. It's a little bit cold in Ann Arbor today, but that's January in Michigan for you.
Yeah, I was commenting that we're having a heat wave. It's going to be 60 degrees here in Davis, California. So glad we're here, not there.
Yeah, well, when it gets to 60 degrees, people are in shorts and at the beach in Michigan. So
yeah,
we look forward to those days.
So it's been a while since we last checked in with you. How's your first year been?
I'm really proud of a lot of the stuff, the new initiatives, new programs that we put into place in our first year in office. I think we've made a lot of strides towards making the criminal legal system fairer and more equitable, making sure that we're focusing on the right things. We got a great team here. So I'm proud of what we've done in year one, and I'm looking forward to continuing to build in the coming year as well.
So what would you say your major initiatives have been?
Well, that's a long list because I came in and I had a lot that I wanted to change and a pretty broad agenda. I guess I can start with some of our policies. We've taken proactive steps to turn the page on the war on drugs in Washtenaw County. We've put into place new policies where we are not charging cannabis-related crimes. Following up on an Ann Arbor City Council resolution, we no longer charge crimes related to the use, possession, or cultivation of entheogenic plants, psychedelic mushrooms. Taking a page from what was really a successful thing that was done in Chittenden County, Vermont, we are no longer prosecuting unauthorized use, possession, or small-scale distribution of buprenorphine, a opioid treatment medication, because we know that if you're using that off script, really for that person, it's very likely the choice is either that or heroin or fentanyl. So anything that we can do from a harm reduction perspective to not put somebody who may be in recovery back on the path to using fentanyl, using heroin, and overdosing is something that I think absolutely we should be doing. We've made major reforms to our pretrial detention system. We have not sought cash bail in a single case since I've been in office. I know cash bail is something that a lot of people do not understand very well, but I want to be very clear. What this means is that we are seeking to hold people in jail if they're dangerous, and we are not seeking to hold them if they're not. And so the amount of money that you have in your bank account really shouldn't play a role in pretrial detention. And we continue to seek to hold those that are dangerous, but we try to apply the same standards to everybody, whether they are wealthy or whether they are poor. There's a number of other policies. We've got a treat kids like kids policy. We're no longer charging young people for minor school-based behavior, a fight in the hallway, an eighth grader stealing a calculator from another eighth grader's backpack, vaping, smoking, typical adolescent experimentation. It's not to say that we don't think there should be consequences for that, but look, we all know that people that look like me, as a white guy, the consequences that are imposed are often at home or at school, and the school to prison pipeline treats a lot of kids differently, and doing what kids do, making the mistakes that kids make, shouldn't tether you to the criminal legal system. We've got policies around immigration. We've got an immigration conscious charging policy, prioritized our certification of T visas and U visas for non-citizen victims who have been human trafficked or have assisted law enforcement in solving particularly serious crimes, and that's been going quite well. We put in place a new policy in which we are not charging low-level contraband crimes stemming from pretext stops. So this is when a police officer will pull you over in your car and a minor traffic violation, but use that with no additional legal justification as a opportunity to search your car. And what we're saying is, look, we all know that this is tied to racial profiling. I've never been asked for consent to search my car for being pulled over for traffic violations. Every motorist should know, look, if you're going to get a ticket, let's get the ticket and let's move on to that. But we don't want to be part of a system in which, motorists are stopped and it's used as a fishing expedition looking for something more without any real suspicion of a crime. So that's some of the stuff from a policy perspective we've been doing. I'll stop there, but I'm also really excited to talk about some of the new programs that we have.
Well, I wanted to go back. You mentioned some of your opioid charging policies. One thing that we've been seeing is kind of the return to the bad old days where some prosecutors across the country are talking about charging people that sell opioids to people, fentanyl in particular, and then it results in an overdose. And they're starting to talk about charging them with murder. Have you seen that?
We've seen a couple of those cases, and look, every case is dependent on its particular facts. What I will say is, with respect to drug distribution and even drug distribution causing death, you have to take a look at all the factual circumstances. On one end of the spectrum, if you are selling cannabis that's laced with fentanyl to young people and they're not aware that it's laced with fentanyl and somebody overdoses and dies, absolutely, I will say I do think there should be very serious consequences attached to that. But if you are somebody that is, using yourself and the distribution that you are engaged in is really sharing with your friends, for example, and one of them tragically overdoses, it is just far too harsh and really unjustifiable to charge that person with murder. So you need to look at the facts of every particular case. I do make a distinction between for-profit drug enterprises, especially those that are selling drugs that are dangerous and their clientele doesn't know about it. Those are folks that we're going to continue to prosecute. I think should be prosecuted, and should in some cases be prosecuted very harshly. But drug distribution laws are so broad that often what we do when we are charging them is sweeping in people who are really just dealing with an addiction themselves, and it's not justified, nor does it protect public safety to sentence them to long prison terms rather than having a rehabilitative option.
And then on bail reform, that's kind of become, unfortunately, a lightning rod of a lot of the pushback. Have you guys seen that yet in Michigan, where somebody's released on either no bail or reduced bail, commits a crime, and then everything blows up from there?
So we've not seen it like we saw it with the tragedy in Wisconsin or some other places. And what I'll say is, look, whenever I hear about those types of tragedies, and they are tragedies, I really think it behooves us to take a step back and think about what we're really advocating for. The guy in Wisconsin that killed 6 people at the Christmas parade, there was a lot of outrage about his bond being set at $1,000 for a previous incident in which he tried to run over an intimate partner with his car using the same weapon that he ended up using to kill 6 people. And in my view, focusing on bail reform as the culprit there is really misplaced, because the fact of the matter is that is somebody that I think, knowing what I know about the facts, probably should have been held on those charges regardless of how much money he had in his bank account. That pattern of conduct is something that's not just unique to people of lower socioeconomic status. If you set his bail, at $25,000, I don't know if he could have made it $50,000. There's a lot of pretty wealthy people that engage in escalating domestic violence. So when we're arguing about what the right number is, I really think we're missing the point. The size of your bank account shouldn't dictate your freedom. I do think that there are some people that pose an imminent threat to the community and need to be held pending trial. But why on earth would the fact that somebody who is dangerous and has money allow that dangerous person to get out? That's no more justified, in my view, than having a poor person who doesn't pose a danger sitting in jail, languishing on $500, $1,000, $5,000 bond. So, I think that these tragedies where people are released on low bond is really a ringing endorsement in some ways of ending the cash bail system and moving towards a system that really takes stock of a person's dangerousness and not just of the size of their bank account.
I completely agree. I think that that's my biggest problem with the bail system is that you could have $1 million bail and somebody's able to pay that. Who's to say that they're not going to go out and commit another crime? I mean, that money is not a barrier.
And it's happened. Look, there was a finance guy in Connecticut that was accused of a really brutal crime, kidnapping and killing his wife, intimidating witnesses and the like. And he got a $6 million bond, which people would say that's a very big bond, but that guy had money, so he was out the next day.
So far, have you had any pushback against any of your reform policies?
So, look, what I always like to say is that if it was easy and if everybody agreed on it, it would have been done a long time ago. So you don't come in and make major changes the way that we have made them without experiencing, some folks that disagree with you. What I will say here in Washtenaw County is that I think that there's a couple of things that have worked to our advantage. Number one, after I won the Democratic primary in August, and this is a Democratic stronghold in Michigan, so I knew there was not going to be, I was going to win the general election, and indeed no Republican filed to run against me. So I had between August and January of 2020 to really plan out my transition and put in place some meat on the bones with the policies that I ran on. And we opened that process up to the broader community, including folks who, don't come from the exact same political perspective as I do. So we had a dozen working groups across a dozen different working areas. And we had representatives on those working groups from law enforcement. We had prosecutors. We had, folks that represented victims' rights groups. We, of course, had, folks from the ACLU, defense lawyers, faith leaders, educational leaders. We tried to make it as broad a tent as possible. And I think that worked well for a couple of reasons. Number one is substance. I think that, sometimes what happens when reform prosecutors take office is they've got their day one memo, but because, for whatever reason, either they didn't have enough time or the community, wasn't engaged or wasn't willing to engage with them in as robust a fashion. There are some holes in their policies that really jump out at people and upset people. The participation in our working groups from law enforcement, from domestic violence advocates and the like, some of whom had concerns about what we were doing around pretrial detention, really made the ultimate substantive product stronger because they brought up specific cases, specific examples, what they're seeing on the ground. They said, I understand what you're trying to do. What are you going to do about this particular scenario? And we hashed it out and we put in place policies that addressed them. And as a result, when the policies were released, we had really covered a lot of ground and anticipated a lot of the potential holes in those policies that we might have had we not had such robust participation from the broader community. So, this is not like a genius plan on my part. I'm happy that we did the working groups. I'm happy that we extended open invitations, but really I think it's a testament to the community here and to our partners that they said, okay, may have even supported somebody else in the election, but Ellie won. He's going to be the prosecutor. I know he's got his vision. It's what the people voted for. Let's work together. Let's work together to make sure that this is promoting the vision the voters chose, promoting equity and fairness, but also making sure that we are taking stock of any public safety concerns.
So can you give an example of that?
Sure. So absolutely. So with our pretext stop policy, right? And what our pretext stop policy says is that if a law enforcement officer pulls somebody over for a minor traffic violation, not because they're investigating a crime, but just a standard traffic stop, and they go, to the driver's side window and they say, you wouldn't mind if I just looked around your car to make sure you don't have anything, right? And that results in the discovery of contraband. We're not bringing those contraband charges. Now, of course, it's different if they have a legitimate reason to investigate or they have probable cause to search. That's different. But one thing that some law enforcement officers brought up about this policy is they said, well, look, there are often cases where we may have justification to search, but asking for consent to search is a good de-escalation technique rather than simply saying we have a tip from a confidential informant, something like that. And especially on the confidential informant piece, they said we don't want to put that in the police report. We can put it in the police report, the cause that we had to search, notwithstanding the fact that we chose to get consent anyway. But what are we supposed to do about a confidential informant? We put that in a police report. We're worried about that person being in danger. And I said, that is a great point. And I totally understand if you've got a tip from a confidential informant, make a traffic stop, right? But really what you are looking for is, suspicion of a crime with that individual, that you don't want to put all that in the police report and put somebody's life at danger. So I said, look, we're going to put a clause in this policy which says that, on paper, that may be something that looks like a pretext stop. But if law enforcement has been doing this investigation, just calls the office and says, here's what's going on. We've got a confidential informant. We'll inform you of the facts of this orally. Then we know it's not really a pretext stop. It was part of an ongoing investigation. And I thought that made a lot of sense. So that's one example.
No, and that's a good one because, there's a big difference between being a pretext stop and being a stop to investigate based on actual information.
Absolutely. And the former is what we're trying to address, and the latter is legitimate.
Yeah, completely. So that's a good example. So has being able to do that then kind of tamped down some of the angst that some of these policies have generated elsewhere?
I think that it bought us some time. And then I think that as we move forward and the world didn't fall apart, that tamped down anxiety as well. The truth of the matter is that whenever you have change, your partners are going to be anxious. And I ran a very robust campaign around the need to reform our criminal legal system. And often people just hear sort of the headlines and, as a result of that, may have some fear about how it's going to play out in practice. So I think putting in place those working groups, getting that input from stakeholders bought us a few months because, people could see, okay, my colleague was on that working group and they're not crazy. And I know that if they signed their name, and agreed to have their name as a member of the working group attached to this policy, that is probably not too bad. So I'm going to give it a chance. And then, just sort of day to day, we continue to focus on serious crimes. We continue to prosecute serious crimes. We continue not to screw around when we think somebody poses a danger to the community. And, I'm not going to lie and say there weren't a few speed bumps along the way, both as my office became acclimated to the policies and understanding exactly what I wanted and what I didn't want, and then also so that law enforcement could see, for example, don't even bother with the marijuana charges anymore. I'm really serious. I'm not prosecuting them. But I think we came to a point where we've reached a good working relationship, and I think that initial stakeholder buy-in and really sharing of information bought us the time that we needed to establish a record of trust.
So how did your office respond? Did people leave? Did people adjust? Is there turmoil?
I will say this, I go to sort of progressive prosecutor conferences through Fair and Just Prosecution, and I sit there and I hear people's war stories about their own offices, and I could not be luckier with the group that we have here, and I really mean that wholeheartedly. We were fortunate because of a few things. One is that I replaced a 28-year prosecuting attorney who'd been around for a while. And as a result of that, sort of naturally via attrition, even before I started running, a lot of the folks that were the old guard there had reached the age of retirement or were moving on to other things. Some folks, I don't fault them for this. Some folks looked at my policies, looked at the direction we were going in, and decided, I don't want to work in this office anymore, and that was fine. We wish them good luck on their future endeavors, and they decided to leave. We only had to make one personnel change in our whole office, and everybody else that wanted to stay, we rehired, and then we got a lot of interest from some incredibly talented lawyers across the state that knew what we were about, that actually applied specifically to this office, liked the vision, and were excited about using their discretion in a way that was rehabilitative, that helped all parties, rather than just having really strict and stringent sort of policies that applied across the board that they had to impose. So we've got a fantastic office. I mean that wholeheartedly. I couldn't be happier with the folks that we have that are new, but even more importantly, the folks that stayed, that gave us a chance, that knowing everything that was coming, decided to continue to work in this administration. They have risen to the occasion. And what I will say I like best about this office is now we're reaching a point where we've got some folks that are coming to us in leadership with ideas about new programs they can put into place that are rehabilitative. They're actually bringing this up from their perspective on the ground. We've already put a few of those in place. So it's been really successful, within the office. And I just couldn't be happier or more proud to work with this really dedicated group of lawyers who, to a person, I know are trying to do the right thing.
So how are things going with respect to wrongful convictions and post-conviction review and things like that?
Yeah, so this was one of my major pushes in year one. I wanted to stand up a conviction integrity and expungement unit. And I know that's not typically two things that you see married to each other, but I'll explain in a second. Conviction integrity unit to review old convictions where there is a claim of actual innocence is something that I just absolutely needed to have in this office. And I made clear, like, I do not want to have an office without it, because if the prosecutor's office has put an innocent person behind bars, we have an ethical obligation to fix that injustice. And prosecutors are uniquely situated to do that. And I think every office of any size needs a conviction integrity unit to look into those old past convictions where there is a credible claim of actual innocence. But the other thing that happened in Michigan this year is the Michigan legislature, a new law went into effect that provided around 1 million Michiganders an opportunity to expunge their old criminal record. That was something that was really transformative to many, many people, but you still had to go through the application process. And one thing that has held a lot of people back is it's all too common that people will have something on their record when it wasn't actually them. You come in to expunge an old marijuana conviction, and they say, well, you're ineligible because you got an attempted murder charge out of Muskegon. And they say, well, I've never been to Muskegon. And it turns out the guy's name is Michael Smith. That's a different Michael Smith in Muskegon. So we said, what if we can actually help people clear those up, just like we clear up wrongful convictions, but clear up those errors on people's criminal records. And so we married the two, and we brought in one of the nation's leading innocence attorneys. Her name is Frances Walters, and she was previously the legal director of the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project, came home to Washtenaw County to work in our office, and she's been leading the conviction integrity and expungement unit, and it was permanently funded by the county commission in November. Now, in the interim, they allowed us to put it into place on an interim basis in February, and she has done a fantastic job on expungement. We've affirmatively assisted over 500 people on expungement, and we're really just rolling into the review of old innocence claims, but we've got over 20 that the office is currently investigating, and look for more soon on that.
So it seems like you've so far avoided most of the drama that a lot of other progressive prosecutors have seen. What does Michigan look like as a whole politically? It seems like Michigan had an interesting period of time for the last year or so.
Well, we've got we're a purple state. We've got Democratic governor, attorney general, secretary of state, but we also have Republicans that are in control of both houses of the legislature. So look, much like other states, you see blue pockets where you have major urban centers such as Detroit. Ann Arbor is a college community, and that's the biggest jurisdiction or biggest city in our jurisdiction. And then you have a lot of really redder parts of the state in your more rural areas. So politically, it's a pretty evenly divided state. We have Republican governors, we have Democratic governors. But what I will say is that there has been a pretty big push around criminal justice reform in Washtenaw County for the last few years, and in the state of Michigan as a whole as well. Like I mentioned, the expungement legislation, that was bipartisan, and it had both Democrats and Republicans championing it.
Very interesting. And what's happening with the crime rate? I know, in a lot of areas, murders have gone way up. Out here, one of the big issues is, retail theft stuff. What's happening there?
We have certainly seen an increase, both in Washtenaw County and across the state in gun violence, and that reflects the national trends. I think that fundamentally the reason for that is pretty simple. You saw gun sales rise by 70% during the pandemic, and the more guns you have out there, the more likely it is that any particular altercation is going to end in gun violence. So it's absolutely something that we are seeing, and we're working on proactive strategies to reduce gun violence, but it's a real concern here, just as it is nationwide.
And how are you guys responding to that?
Well, look, obviously we prosecute the gun crimes. That's the main thing. But in addition to that, we're working with violence interrupters on the ground, community members, many of whom have old criminal records and have some credibility because they have a past, but now we're trying to help their community and step in where they see disputes and feuds getting out of control to where they might end up in gun violence. And so, we work with groups on the ground there. Our sheriff's office does a really good job engaging in violence interruption strategies. And really, at the end of the day, that's the key. Police and prosecutors are responsive. They can come in, make an arrest, prosecute after something bad has already happened. And certainly you can incapacitate somebody by sending them to prison. And I do think that people that, shoot guns at each other need to be put in prison. but you don't prevent it from happening in the first place. And if we're really concerned about public safety, it's got to be a both and. Obviously, there needs to be consequences when you pull the trigger on a gun. There's no question about that. But really, what we should be focusing on, in addition to that, is making sure that it doesn't get to that point in the first place. Because I don't want to be in a position where we can only do something after there's already been the victim of a crime.
And kind of a broader question. I mean, right now, we've seen a few years of criminal justice reform and some progress there. And then maybe in the last few months, maybe a pushback. What do you see as the major challenge for the criminal justice reform movement at this point?
I think we have to do a better job of highlighting successes. You hear about failures in the criminal legal system when somebody goes out and commits a crime. And of course, that's always something that's blamed on more progressive policies, more progressive prosecutors. I will note that we never impose the same level of scrutiny on the traditional law enforcement establishment. We never say, well, this person got out of prison and then did something again. Why wasn't the prison more rehabilitated, right? Why didn't we do something to get this person turned back around? But there's a number of success stories too, and because those aren't headline grabbing, they often go overlooked. I'll give you an example. We put into place Michigan's first pre-plea diversion program in Washtenaw County, which means that typically you have to plead guilty to a crime in order to get access to rehabilitative services, substance use treatment, mental health treatment, and the like. And that can be really damaging to people because even pleading guilty to a crime, even though it might be dismissed a year later if you complete your programming, that can put you at risk of losing housing, losing your job. For non-citizens, that very act of pleading guilty triggers the immigration consequences. It doesn't matter what happened down the road. And so we said, look, let's rewind the clock. Let's make available those exact same services, but before somebody pleads guilty. And if you, succeed, we can dismiss the case without having entered a guilty plea. And if you fall down, if you're unwilling to abide by the terms or unable to, then we have the option of moving forward with the original case. Well, we launched this in May. And we have a 98% success rate with that program. That means 98% of the people that went through it or are going through it are either on track to complete the program or have already completed it and had their charges dismissed. And there are stories that come out of that. We had somebody that shoplifted a bottle of wine because he was in recovery, but relapsed, went back to alcohol use. And in fact, what we were able to do was get him set up with housing, get him back into his program, and not disrupt his life any more than it had already been disrupted. And he's doing great now. And he was, his case was dismissed last week. That's a success story. And we need to focus as a movement, I think, just as much on those as the folks that oppose reform focus on the stories that grab headlines and are real tragedies.
Yeah, and I think, one of the problems as somebody who has to cover both ends of that is that, you say 98% success rate. Hey, that's great, but you could have 99% of the people, 99 out of 100 people doing real well in this program. And then one person, shoots somebody up and nobody's ever going to pay attention to the other 99.
Yeah. So, and that's that is a real problem. That is a real problem. But I think what we've got to do is really highlight the successes and move forward based on that.
All right. So in our last few minutes, what else would you like to do? Kind of your plan.
Well, we want to expand that pre-plea diversion program. We've got new programs that are coming online around making sure that young people are able to get out from under the thumb of the criminal legal system, regardless of how much money they have. It's going to be a restitution earning program, and we're looking forward to announcing that sometime in the next few weeks. But the key now is we're really in the building phase. We want to build up programs and alternatives to the criminal legal system so that the criminal legal system isn't the only way that we have to deal with harm. And we've got a number of things in the works, and I'm looking forward to rolling them out.
Well, I appreciate you coming on here and sharing what's going on in Michigan.
All right. Thank you so much.
Elie Savitt, he's the DA in Washtenaw County, Michigan, home of Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan. This has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.